Welcome to the Turkey Hunter Podcast with me, your host, Andy Galliano. In this podcast, I share with turkey hunters just like you how to have more turkeys on your hunting property and how to have more successful turkey hunts. I teach you how to do this with tips and interviews with turkey hunting pros, wildlife management tips, and entertaining turkey hunting stories. Tune in weekly as I share proven and simple strategies to help you have more success this turkey season. Make sure to head over to www.iamturkeyhunting.com to subscribe to receive free turkey hunting tips, tactics, strategies, and product reviews. Also, please visit and like my Facebook fan page. Go to Facebook and search I Am Turkey Hunting, and also feel free to post your turkey hunting photos from this past season and let us know where and when you killed your bird. For all of you Twitter users out there, please follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @TurkeyHitman, and I will be sure to follow you back. And now, for this week's show. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the Turkey Hunter Podcast. You are listening to episode 111, Osceola Wild Turkeys with Roger Shields. And I am your host, Ebenezer Scrooge, and we are 97 days, 16 hours, 42 minutes, and 54 seconds away from opening day of spring turkey season in Alabama. So I may be Ebenezer Scrooge when it comes to Christmas, but when it comes to turkey season, I am far from that. I'm more like little Timmy on Christmas Eve. So I mentioned I am Ebenezer Scrooge, and I really am. I kind of feel like the majority of the country has gotten away from what Christmas is all about. And it really just irks me. It crawls all over me when I go into a store like Lowe's or Home Depot in October and they have not even pulled down their Halloween decorations yet, and they've already got their Christmas decorations up. It's all about the dollar, and that is not the reason for the season. So, with all of that being said, despite the fact that I'm Ebenezer Scrooge, I have a very happy person at home, and that is because we went and got a tree last night. So the tree is up. The house is starting to smell like Christmas. The wife is happy, and we don't have any Christmas decorations up yet, other than the tree being in the stand and being in the living room, but the foundation is there, and she is pumped. And I guess really that's a big part of what it's about too. So today, you got a quickie from me, a quickie intro and a quickie outro, because I have to pick up my Yankee buddy John from Virginia at the airport soon. We have our annual dove, rabbit, squirrel, deer, and chupacabra hunt this week, and I always look forward to this trip every year, and this year is no different. I get to hang out with a number of my buddies whom you all have met in previous episodes. Chip, who's been in several episodes, but the one that most of you will probably remember him from is Old Man Haney's Turkey. That's episode 11. Todd will be there, and Todd is probably the one guy that I turkey hunt with the most, and he was in episode 13, and that is the story about the 13-year-old boy who happened to have shot a turkey and got very excited and forgot the fact that he's not supposed to be using adult words. Of course, I mentioned my Yankee buddy John from episode 19, the Missouri Monster Turkey, and episode 33, the Texas Decoy Massacre, which still tears me up. Eric from episode 17, the Whiskey Turkey. George, who was also on episode 11, Old Man Haney's Turkey, with Chip. And my buddy Brian, who was on episode 34, telling all about the story of our Ohio turkey hunt from a couple of years ago. So, as you guys can probably guess, it's going to be an eventful and fun week with those guys. And since I'm going to be quick today, I want to go ahead and get into today's show. So, today I have Roger Shields with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to talk about Osceola wild turkeys. I know that there are many of you guys listening to this show who have zero interest in traveling out of state to pursue a Grand Slam, a World Slam, or even a Royal Slam. And right now, this very second, you have zero interest in hunting the Osceola subspecies. But I want to tell you that I believe you're missing out on one of the most unique experiences that a hunter can have while hunting, and that is going to Florida and hunting the Osceola wild turkey. These birds are masters at appearing from and disappearing into nowhere. And speaking of masters, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If an eastern wild turkey has a bachelor's degree in woodsmanship, then the Osceola wild turkey has a master's degree in woodsmanship. And of course, that's just my opinion, and I think it was Jeff Buds, who I had on the show, who disagreed with me because he thinks that easterns are harder to kill than Osceolas. And I'm cool with that. Jeff's killed and hunted lots more Osceolas than I have and probably ever will. So I can't argue that with him, and I wouldn't argue with him even if I could because, like all of you guys, he's entitled to his opinion. Okay, so I digressed a little bit, and I need to get back into today's topic, and that is Roger Shields and Osceola wild turkeys. And I mentioned that Roger is with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and he is actually the wild turkey program coordinator for the commission. And he knows a lot about Osceolas and their habitat in Florida as well. So without any further delay, here's Roger to talk about Osceolas with us. Hope you enjoy the interview, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the other side. Hey everybody, I am excited to tell you that I have on the line with me today Roger Shields, who is the Wild Turkey Program Coordinator with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And I've got Roger with us today to talk about one of my favorite topics relating to wild turkeys and one of my favorite subspecies of wild turkeys. And so far I have 5 of those. And that is the Osceola wild turkey. And Roger's going to share with us a little bit of information about that for you guys that maybe have an Osceola on your list, on your bucket list. And if you don't, I highly recommend it. It truly is, well, it's an experience. And it's something that everyone needs to experience. It's just, to me, the birds have a sort of mystique around them. And I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit during our conversation. But Roger, how are you and where are you?
Hi, Andy. I'm doing great. I'm actually in my office today. I'm in Panama City, Florida, here on the Emerald Coast and the Panhandle of Florida.
Yeah, which is a beautiful spot of the world to be in, no doubt.
I will say it's some beautiful beaches we have here.
That is for sure. That is for sure. And some mighty fine fishing in the area as well.
Yes.
So, did you guys get any rain last night?
Very little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, we're hurting for rain, but we did get a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I know that there are still a lot of areas, even though we had that rain come through, a lot of areas that are suffering from the drought, and it'll take a long time to recover from that in the southeast. But at least, maybe this little band of rain that came through will give us a break from some of these forest fires and wildfires that are going on throughout the southeast. So that's a good thing. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, and you told me you turkey hunt. Tell us a little bit about how you got into turkey hunting as well.
All right. Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and then I went and did some schooling in Utah and South Dakota. Worked on my master's studying wild turkeys in South Dakota. They were doing kind of an introduction of the eastern subspecies into a portion of the state. And so that was my graduate work, and that's when I really first got exposed to wild turkeys. After I graduated from South Dakota State University, I got hired down here in Florida working with the Wild Turkey Management Program, and I've basically been with them ever since. I took a couple years, worked with a different group, but then found my way back to turkeys. And it was down here when I kind of got exposed to turkey hunting. My supervisor that hired me, he was an avid turkey hunter, and he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a little bit about the sport of turkey hunting and got me the experience into it. So that's how I got started in it.
Fantastic. So you worked on the introduction of the easterns into South Dakota. And what part of the state were the easterns introduced?
That study was in Grant County in the northeast corner of the state.
Okay.
The South Dakota Department of Game and Fish had previously experimented with some different subspecies in that, even a little bit further north than Grant County, and a previous graduate student had looked at that. They had some Rio Grandes and some Easterns, and they were trying to decide which one seemed to do better. And his research seemed to indicate that the Easterns did a little bit better in that part of the state. And so they wanted to expand, and so they once they knew the Easterns seemed to do better, then that's where they went. They got birds from Iowa and Kentucky donated and moved them into Grant County, which was the next county to kind of the southeast. And they wanted to make sure they were, surviving and doing well. So that was my project, to kind of monitoring and following their expansion and growth in the county.
Very cool. And is that
Yeah.
population alive and well today?
As far as I know, yeah, doing pretty well. I know it pretty rapidly. They opened it up to hunting, limited hunting, and it's been open to hunting ever since. I think it was about the third year after the restoration or the introduction that they started hunting it. So
Wow.
pretty quick.
Yeah.
Now they did have a few, I don't know what you would call them, maybe game farm birds or something like that in the northern part of the county that probably helped numbers a little bit, but for the most part they were all wild, trapped and transplanted birds into the county, and they just took off.
Cool. Yeah. That all of that's interesting to me, and just the, I guess, reintroduction or even introduction in some cases of turkeys, and not just turkeys, but other wildlife species as well, into areas that they once were, or new areas for them. And just, I guess, that whole experiment of, are they going to make it or are they not, and that type of thing. So the fact that you got to be part of that, I think is pretty interesting, pretty neat for me. So
Yeah.
well, let's talk about some Osceola wild turkeys.
Okay.
I can talk to you about Rios and Easterns and Merriams all day too, but we'll get into the Osceolas. So let's, I guess, start with the obvious, or in the case of the Osceola, a lot of times the not so obvious difference between the Osceolas and the Easterns, but as well as the other subspecies of turkeys. So what physically distinguishes an Osceola from, let's say, the Easterns, because they most resemble the Easterns? I think it's probably pretty easy for most of us to look at a picture and say, this is a Merriam's or a Rio, and
Right.
This is an Eastern or an Osceola. So let's look at that difference between an Eastern and an Osceola.
Yeah, probably the most obvious difference that people are going to notice would be just the appearance of the wings, the primary and secondary wing feathers. And the difference is that, I'll start with the Eastern. The barring on those feathers on an Eastern, and the other subspecies for that matter, the white and the dark barring are somewhat even in the width of those bars, and on the Osceola, the amount of white barring is greatly diminished, and sometimes the barring doesn't even go all the way across the feather. It'll be broken and things like that. So it gives that wing a very kind of an overall darker appearance. It gives the whole bird an overall darker appearance. So that's the most obvious difference. When you start talking averages and numbers and things, they're smaller birds than the other subspecies. When you talk about weight, they seem to have a little bit longer legs, but they're lighter in body weight. Although in most cases, individual variation, you're not going to notice any kind of difference there, and you're not going to be able to detect any kind of size difference really if you're just looking at them. And then also their spurs tend to be a little bit longer on Osceolas than the other subspecies as well. Although there again, individual variation, bird to bird, you may not see any real distinct difference. It's just when you get hundreds of birds and you start averaging them, then you see the difference.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, overall, the main difference people will see is just in that wing, the appearance of those wings.
Yeah. That was, you mentioned the long legs on the Osceola, and that was one thing that really stuck out to me and my hunting buddies when we hunted them the first time, is that it seems like the legs on the Osceola are about 50% longer than the legs on an Eastern. Do you think that has something to do with the fact that they tend to hang around a little bit in some swampy areas, and need a little bit of extra height in some cases, or what do you think that's attributed to?
It could be just to give them that little bit of extra height, but yeah, I don't know what would be the reason for that.
Yeah, like I said, is something that kind of stuck out to us, and could just be the area that we hunted those birds, and that particular little strain there in that area had some long legs. I won't go as far as to say they were flamingos. But it was noticeable. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, like I mentioned when we started our call here, the Osceola has a little bit of a mystique around it. And, I think that the name of the bird I think it's fitting, really. When you study the history and that kind of thing of the Indians in that area, I think that, is, like I said, a fitting name for the turkey. But for those who are listening to the show who don't know, how did the Osceola get its name?
All right. Well, the subspecies was described by a gentleman who's an ornithologist, naturalist, traveled pretty broadly around the country in his studies, but he came to Florida and he observed the what he called the Florida wild turkey and a different appearance than the ones he'd seen elsewhere, particularly the eastern, and so he described it. The gentleman's name was William Earl Dodge Scott. This was back in 1890, and he selected as the name of this subspecies the Osceola in recognition or in honor or whatever of the Seminole chief Osceola, the great chief that had led the wars against the invading, if you want to call it that, the white man as he came into Florida. And so, yeah, kind of recognized the heritage and the history of Florida itself in the naming of that subspecies.
These birds in the area that they live in, I think if we as civilized human beings who enjoy our air conditioning and mosquito screens around our porches and that kind of stuff, if we were to live in the area that those birds live in, day out, that would be pretty amazing. And you think about it, and the Indians did just that in that area. And so, I think it's all pretty cool. That's, just an amazing area. I mean, it really is. The terrain and the landscape that these birds live in, day out, is some of the most beautiful in the country, but also I think can be some of the most brutal in the country as well, when you consider that there's a few water moccasins around, there's a couple of alligators, but if those two don't get you, then the mosquitoes are most likely just going to literally carry you away.
Yeah, it's harsh conditions. In fact, it's interesting you bring that up because Florida, because of the harsh conditions, for a long time had a very healthy turkey population. This is going back into the 1800s, where a lot of the other states in the Union, in the southeast, we'll say, we're starting to see declines because of the growth of the human population and hunting and loss of habitat, things like that. But Florida was still relatively untouched from all of that because of the harsh conditions. Nobody really wanted to come to Florida. But as technology improved and air conditioning and different things like that came on, and people started coming into Florida, and the population grew, by like in the early 1900s, the population started growing, and that's when we started seeing the turkey population declining. So, yeah, we were kind of a refuge for turkeys for a long time. Yeah. And it protected them, and they had real healthy numbers, and then went through that decline. Then, just like everywhere else in the country, got concerned and really kind of put effort into restoring them and brought their numbers back up to real healthy levels again today.
It takes a lot of work on a lot of people's part to do that. I think everyone listening to the show appreciates that for sure. Well, we know that Florida is the only state that has the Osceola wild turkey in it. But can you share with us the range of the Osceola? Because you guys are fortunate enough to have not just the Osceola, but you also have Easterns as well. So there's a fairly distinct line, at least I understand there is, of where the state has drawn. It says everything from here to here is Osceola territory, and everything from here to here is Eastern territory. But
right.
Can you share that
well,
with us?
what is occurring? So you have the Eastern subspecies in the eastern U.S. and then in Florida in the peninsula, we've got the Osceola. And where their ranges meet, we have really more of an intergrade, and it's a rather wide range or area that this intergrade occurs. And if you want to get technical, the part of the state that we consider eastern is really more of an intergrade region, and that stretches from Georgia all the way over to Louisiana. Really, this is where the two are kind of mixing and mingling. So what happened is that folks that were looking at it noticed that the influence of the eastern seemed to disappear, and it became very just kind of pure Osceola at a certain point in the state. And so they kind of had this line, but to make it easy for folks to keep track of, they just kind of, the Turkey Federation and our agency back in the day agreed and settled upon this line that follows county borders, and it basically runs from just north of Jacksonville at an angle kind of south-west, just kind of past Lake City down to what we call the Big Bend area of the state, down there around Cross City and Perry. And so the county lines that along there is really kind of the boundary that we call everything south of that line is, if you find a bird south of that line, we consider it an Osceola.
Yeah. So what are some of the counties in the state that has the highest populations of Osceolas, and are there any public hunting opportunities in those counties?
Oh yeah. So we actually have a lot of public hunting opportunities in the state. We've got somewhere around 6 million acres of public lands, and not all of it in the Osceola range, but a big portion of it is. And interestingly enough, or maybe fittingly, one of the really good counties in the state is its namesake, the Osceola County, right there around Orlando. Has a real good dense population of birds. You go pretty much north of Orlando, heading up toward Jacksonville, following kind of either side of the St. Johns River, and those are, again, areas of pretty high density turkeys. Those counties are like Marion County, Alachua County, Bradford, Putnam, Clay, those counties there along that St. Johns River. And then kind of the other area that I would mention would be kind of the ranch land areas of South Florida that occurs west and southwest of Big Lake Okeechobee. Some of those counties are like Charlotte, Glades, Collier County, even Hardy and DeSoto County have pretty good populations. Yeah. And that's down in the real south part of Florida.
Yeah. I think that when most people hear the word Florida and think of the state, they think of beaches and beautiful girls in bikinis.
Yeah, or Disney.
Oh, that's there too?
Yeah.
And so I don't think a lot of people realize how much or how many farms and ranches there are there. And there, of course, Florida is known for the orange groves and the plantations there, but also the ranches and cattle farmers and those establishments there, and they all of the Osceolas do well in both of those habitats. And so yeah, it's pretty
yeah,
neat.
We do really owe a bit of gratitude to those landowners that have maintained their lands in kind of native conditions and supported our wildlife. And if it weren't for them, and we do have a lot of public land, but we're reliant on those those private lands as much as well. So we're grateful for what they do. And you're absolutely right. The ranch lands support a lot of wild turkeys in South Florida. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. People, like you said, they think of the beaches and the Miami and Disney and Orlando, but there's a lot of really wide open spaces and deep woods you can get lost in rather easily down here too. So
that is the truth.
Yeah, yep.
I think people are kind of amazed to hear of cowboys that come from Florida, but there are a lot of them.
There are.
So Florida, at least to me, I think is very protective of the numbers of turkeys in its public land areas, and I think that's a good thing. Are there, and I'm saying that along the lines of the areas where there are draws put in
Hmm.
for tags to hunt a public land area over a specific period of time where it's kind of closed off to the general public and only the people who've drawn are able to go in and hunt. But it's not every public land place where the Osceola habitat is that way, is it?
No, no, and what you're referring to is we call our limited entry
Yeah, thank you.
system. We have quota permits for most of the areas, and then a few of the areas down there are special opportunity hunt areas. But we do have a handful of areas, and generally they're really large properties too. That are you don't have to have any kind of special permit to go and hunt there, any kind of limited entry type permit. They're just open, and you can go, and they're pretty much open the entire season too. So, but going back to the quota system or the limited entry system, the reason we've got that is we've got a lot of pressure on these public lands, and it's just a way of kind of controlling how much pressure these areas do receive, and still, maintaining populations there. And like I said, a lot of them are smaller areas, so good in terms of wildlife numbers and turkey populations that are on these areas, but they're small in acreage and a lot of them. And so we try to limit the number of people that can be out there, and so you don't get too much crowding and that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, I think that's a good thing. But I know that I hear people from other parts of the country saying, well, it's impossible to go to Florida, nearly impossible to go to Florida and hunt public land down there for an Osceola, and that's just not the case. So,
Not at all, and some of these areas that are open that you're referring to in the heart of the counties that we were just talking about that are dense, high density turkey numbers. A couple of them just south of Orlando. We've got Three Lakes and Bull Creek, both excellent areas. In fact, they're kind of on either side of one of our special opportunity areas. Areas like I was saying before, these special opportunity areas are set up in high quality turkey areas to be just kind of super hunts, and then on either side of that we've got these open areas that anybody can go and hunt. There's big cypress down there, and on the other side of the Lake Okeechobee, on the east side, there's the Corbett Wildlife Management Area. Up in a little bit further north, we've got what they call Upper St. Johns River Marsh, and so there are plenty of areas that people can go to and find birds. And like I said, they're actually in really good habitat and have good numbers of birds. They do get a lot of pressure because they are open, but the numbers of birds are there.
yeah, yeah,
And particularly, I think if you avoid kind of that first weekend or the first week or so of the season, a lot of the pressure really drops off in these areas. And if you can arrange your hunting trips and things like that around some of that, it might work out better for some folks.
sure. Yeah, and I think that's great advice. And I keep touching on the public land, but there are some fantastic private land opportunities and some wonderful outfitters in Florida that some of these cattle farmers and farmers who operate these orange groves and that kind of thing they do have hunting operations that
Mm-hmm.
open up
Yeah.
opportunities there, and it's some fantastic hunting. So there is no shortage of hunting opportunities for Osceolas in the area. Just depends on, like most things in life, you're either going to trade time or you're going to trade money. And I
That's
think
probably a good way of putting it.
I think if you're going to hunt public land, you're going to be trading some time. And
Yeah.
a lot of, I would say boot leather, but you don't want to wear leather boots, I don't think. So we'll say some boot rubber. How about that?
There you go. Yes.
So, you mentioned in these areas, maybe letting the first week of the season come and go before someone takes on a public land hunt in Florida. But let's talk about the season a little bit because of the fact that Florida is so far south, and in the winter time when we're making that transition from the short days of the winter to the longer days of summer, Florida is really the first state where that starts to transition and we start getting these longer periods of daylight, which sparks the wild turkey into wanting to maybe be a little bit more romantic than they are in the fall and winter time. So the season comes in earlier.
Yeah, it does.
And that gives people from other parts of the country whose season is not in yet the opportunity to start turkey hunting sooner. So is there what I guess where in the state does the season open the earliest for the Osceola? Kind of what counties and what areas?
Hmm. So the southern part of the state opens a couple weeks earlier than the rest of the state, the northern part, and it's again we follow kind of an easy to identify line. It's State Road 70. It runs east to west, basically just on the northern tip of Lake Okeechobee. And so all those counties that lay south of that highway, they open every year the first weekend, first Saturday of March with the regular season. Now there's a youth hunt, a 2-day youth hunt, both on private land and a lot of our public lands offer it as well. There's a 2-day youth hunt that occurs the weekend before that, which is typically in February. But for the regular season, that first Saturday of March is when that season opens, and I think that's the earliest season in the country. The rest of the state north of that line, it opens 2 weeks later, so that's the third Saturday in March that it opens. Regardless of when it opens, the season runs for 5 full weeks or 6 weekends. It closes on a Sunday.
Yeah, it's a nice long season. And actually, you guys, in a lot of the areas of the state, you guys have a lengthy fall season as well, don't you?
Yeah. So we have kind of a fall turkey season, depending on what part of the state you're in. It's either a 41-day season or a 58-day season, and that's shotguns are allowed in that fall season. But the turkeys are also legal during the full archery season, which is 30 to 33-day season, during the crossbow season and the muzzleloading gun season. So there's plenty of opportunity as well in the fall to go after birds.
And I think that most people listening to this show are spring turkey hunters and they're fall deer hunters or upland bird hunters, that kind of thing, duck hunters. So, I think that if you want to probably avoid the springtime turkey hunting pressure in the public lands, then fall may be a good time to get out there and chase an Osceola through the swamp.
Yeah, the opportunities on public land for fall are a little more limited. That across the board on private land, all those seasons I mentioned on the public land, the archery season is pretty much open on all of our public lands. The gun season is a little more limited. There's I think about 12 areas that offer what we call the firearm fall season. So that's a little bit more of a challenge to find those areas on public land. But the private land, it's the whole time.
Okay, that's great info.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about some of the physical differences between the Osceolas and the other subspecies, the easterns, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the behavioral differences between. And I think that just because we have such a large part of the country where eastern wild turkeys roam, that there are a great number of people listening to this show who hunt easterns and can relate how the birds in their areas react to calling and how much they gobble and that kind of thing. They can picture that in their mind anytime you ask them to talk about it. And I know that it's really hard to say just in general, how responsive to calling and to decoys and to gobbling is a subspecies of turkeys, because there are pockets within their population where they don't have as much pressure and maybe they're more responsive to calls and decoys and maybe they gobble more or whatever it happens to be. But just generally, and you're familiar with the easterns from your graduate work, how do you think the gobbling of the Osceola compares to some of the other subspecies that you've got some experience with? And talk a little bit about responsiveness to calls, to decoys, things that us hunters are going to want to know before we start to plan a trip to hunt Osceolas.
And I have to say up front, I don't have a lot of experience with the western subspecies. Basically, I've only hunted down here in Florida, so my breadth of experience is somewhat limited. But from what I've heard other folks say, and what I have witnessed myself is that the Osceola, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to gobble as much as some of the other subspecies, and it's not unusual to hear them gobble a little bit on the roost, and then once they fly down, they don't respond anymore. So when people are coming from out of state and I'm talking with them, I encourage them to be patient. Just because you're not hearing birds and they're not gobbling all the way in doesn't mean they're not coming. Right. They for whatever reason, they just a lot of times just and this is why we love turkey hunting, because it's so variable. But that's not to say that someday some bird's not just going to sound off and go crazy and gobble all the way into the decoy or to your calling or what. But it just seems like a lot of times they're much quieter than other subspecies in their response to calling. And honestly, I don't really know how responsive they are to decoys and things like that. I think I've heard folks say that one day it works and one day it doesn't, just probably much like any other bird, right, other subspecies, that they'll try it with decoys, and if it's not working, if they're getting shy of the decoys, they don't want to come in or whatever, they'll take decoys away, or vice versa. If they can't get them to come in, they'll stick a decoy up, and that'll sometimes bring them in. So I don't know there's a whole lot of behavioral difference in the way they respond to those things.
My experience with the Osceolas is limited in hunting them compared to a lot of people, especially turkey hunters in that South Florida area. But I think that what you said about them not gobbling all the way into your calls or into your decoy setup or wherever you happen to be hunting is very true. We actually, on my first trip down there, the first Osceola I killed never gobbled one time. And he just appeared. It was like he opened up a trap door in the middle of a cow pasture and just showed up right there and was standing there at 30 yards staring at us. And so we were actually hunting and calling a different bird, and I'm sure this was a subordinate bird, or at least I would think he was a subordinate bird that was afraid that if he gobbled he might get his rear end kicked. But the bird, we were calling a bird that was gobbling off in a different direction, and I just happened to get that feeling that I was being watched, kind of cut my head over to my left shoulder, and there he is standing there, like I said, about 30 yards and just looking. So
yeah, you don't want to overcall, and be patient. They may be right, and a lot of the area in Florida is fairly thick in terms of the cover, and so you don't see them all the time until, like you said, they just all of a sudden materialize right in front of you.
Yeah, you actually have to hunt. You have to keep your eyes and your ears open at all times, because you don't know where those jokers are going to show up.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Well, you mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about the range of the Osceola, and that's the hybridization between the Easterns and the Osceolas, and you used a different term, and I'll ask you again what that term was.
Intergrade.
Okay.
Kind of an intergrade between the two subspecies and that range where they meet up.
Yeah, and you mentioned that runs even all the way into Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, based on some of the early researchers and what they found and what they studied, it seems like that strip runs, kind of along that whole coastal plain through Alabama and even into the edge of Louisiana, Mississippi, over to Louisiana. But and basically what you're seeing is just a mixing of those characteristics and those genetic traits and things, where again they're subspecies, so they'll interbreed anytime they come upon each other.
Yeah. So I guess because of that, and because of the fact that it's been going on forever, there's not much concern or worry with either you as the program coordinator, basically the head turkey guy in the state of Florida. There's no worry about hybridization of the Osceola subspecies and that water getting muddy, so to speak, over a period of time.
Yeah, and that line creeping.
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, you think about the evolutionary time frame that these subspecies have been occurring or developing, and we're talking thousands of years. Particularly now, as we're a little more sensitive to the differences of the subspecies, when we are doing any kind of translocation and moving birds into new areas or trying to restore, kind of restock areas. We're very sensitive of what those birds should be, and then we make sure we're getting the right genetics, if you will, or the right subspecies. So, for example, we did a restoration in the Panhandle a few years back, early 2000s, and we made sure that we were pulling birds from local counties and that they were easterns and being moved into those areas. Conversely, we did a couple other restorations. We did one kind of a restoration to the Everglades. There traditionally had been birds in this, what they call pine rockland area of the Everglades. You wouldn't think it, but there used to be a connection to the northern part of the state through this kind of rockland area that ran up through Miami. It's been since cut off as development occurred, but anyway, we took birds there and we made sure that they were, from South Florida, the birds that we released, they were the Osceola subspecies. Similarly, we did a restoration up around Jacksonville, and which is kind of on the line, that we took birds from neighboring counties, make sure they're kind of the similar subspecies. So we're more sensitive to those things, and we had the luxury of being kind of picky and choosy in where we're pulling birds from. I mentioned earlier that back in the 50s, 60s, when we were doing a lot of our restoration work, we were pulling birds primarily from South Florida and moving them to areas north. And so, if anything, we were reinforcing the Osceola genetics into areas in more northern portions of the state by doing that. I don't have any real big concern of as you said, muddying the waters genetically.
Very interesting. In that intergrade that you were talking about, that's new to me. I didn't know that it existed and that there were characteristics of the Osceolas that ran that far west. So that's very interesting. Well, Roger, that's all the questions that I have for you. I think I literally could talk Osceolas with you all day, but I know you don't have time for that. And, I've got some editing to do and a show to put out there, so I don't have time for all that either. But I really do appreciate your time and the information that you've shared with us about Osceolas. And, I've said it a couple of times, for you guys that have not hunted Osceolas yet, whether you even have a desire to complete a Grand Slam or not, I want to recommend going to Florida and hunting not just the Osceolas, but you can hunt the Easterns in the Panhandle as well. But it is just truly, it's a different experience than hunting the foothills of the Appalachians, or, hunting the big oak flats and some of the swampy areas in the south and that kind of thing. It's something that I think people would really enjoy a whole lot. And if you do get out further south and hunt those Osceolas, there really is that mystique about them. And, they are kind of like a ghost in the swamp. They're here and they're gone, and they're something really cool to sit back and watch if you get the opportunity to do that. And I highly recommend you guys listening to the show put that on your bucket list and try to make that happen at some point and get to Florida and do some hunting.
Well, we'd love to have you. Anybody come on down and spend a week down here hunting. And I'll offer, if anybody's trying to plan a hunt and got questions, I'm more than willing to visit with them and share what knowledge I can with them and help steer them in a good direction.
That is a huge help. That is more than I'm sure I could ask of you to do, and I know that you will most likely get a phone call or two from this recording and that offer that you made. And so I know I'm appreciative of you offering that. And, I'm not ever going to ask Roger or any other guest to tell me a tree to go sit beside, his favorite honey hole to go and hunt on this recording. That would be crazy. But
I wouldn't tell you anyway. But
see, there you go. But if you call Roger and you have a conversation with him, maybe he'll put you within about 40 or 60 acres of his favorite tree to sit against. So you never know what'll happen if you make that phone call. So Roger, thank you for being so gracious and being, gracious with your offer, but gracious with your knowledge and information about the Osceolas. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I wish you and yours a very happy holiday season coming up, and hopefully look forward to maybe doing this again with you sometime soon.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure visiting with you and talking turkey. We love doing it.
Thanks a bunch. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk again sometime soon.
All right. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Okay, so first I want to thank Roger for taking time out of what is a very busy schedule to come on the show and share with us what I feel like is some great information for those of us who want to go and hunt Osceola turkeys. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the information that Roger shared with us. All right, so that's it. I'm going to cut you guys loose for the week, but before I do, I need one favor from you guys. Here's the favor for this week. Please like, share, and retweet this week's episode on social media for me. That is a huge help with promoting the show, and it really goes a long way to introduce the show to new listeners, and I appreciate you guys for doing that. All right, so I'm off to the airport to pick up Yankee Buddy John. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in this week, guys. I know that you have choices, and I appreciate you spending your time with us. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye. Thanks for tuning in. You were just listening to the Turkey Hunter podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please go on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. And make sure to head over to www.iamturkeyhunting.com to subscribe for free turkey hunting tips, tactics, strategies, and product reviews to help you have a more successful turkey season. And stay tuned for upcoming episodes on hunting afternoon birds, how to film your hunt, and the breeding cycle of hens, as well as some guest interviews. Thanks again for listening. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us. See you next week.